You alluded to the topic that I want to ask you about. Latinos are very much concerned about the economy. They're concerned about education. They also believe in trustworthiness. I want to start with a topic that I believe will could tell the future of it after this election. It's immigration reform. Many Latinos are discouraged by the lack of immigration reform. They believe their vote has been taken for granted. We know what your position is, but what I would like for you to do is to walk us through the steps.
Right.
How will you get immigration reform, something that President Obama was not able to do, so that Latinos can believe that something is going to happen, that their vote, again, is not being taken for granted, considering that the House, at least the House, will remain under Republican control?
It's a great question, and it's one that I obviously have given much thought to, because I am determined that we are going to achieve comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship. So here is how I see it. First of all, we're going to start immediately. I want this to be a clear, high priority for my administration. We will be prepared to introduce legislation as quickly as we can do so. I am hoping that the outcome of the election, which I am working hard to ensure, will send a clear message to our Republican friends that it's time for them to quit standing in the way of immigration reform. If you remember, after the 2012 election, the Republican National Committee did what they called an autopsy of their loss and concluded that they could not continue to deny the importance of immigration reform, and they urged Republicans running for office to get on board. Now, that hasn't turned out the way that they seem to have hoped. We have instead a Republican nominee who has been virulently anti-immigrant. But there's nothing like winning to change minds. And I think, number one, we have a good chance of having a Democratic Senate if everybody does what I hope they will do and vote for Democratic candidates for the Senate. I believe we will pick up some seats in the House and at least, if not take it back, narrow the numbers. If we move in the Senate and then we demand that there be a vote in the House, because I'm convinced that if the bipartisan bill that had been achieved in the Senate, remember when Marco Rubio was for it and people worked hard and achieved it, if it had been allowed to come for a vote in the House, it would have passed. So I view the political landscape as increasingly favorable to us making this happen. I will also defend the President's executive actions. I, like you, was disappointed with the Supreme Court decision, but remember what it did. It sent the case back to be tried. It did not determine the case. So DACA and DAPA are still alive. Trump has said one of his first acts as president would be to eliminate every executive order that President Obama has signed, including those on immigration issues. So I will defend DACA and DAPA while I work vigorously for immigration reform. I have proposed an Office of Immigrant Affairs for the White House so that we are able to answer questions and provide information and help people. I will take a very hard look at the deportation priorities. My priority are violent criminals, people suspected of any kind of connection to terrorism, not hardworking mothers and fathers and people who go to work, help support this economy, pay $12 billion a year into Social Security. So we will take a hard look at that. We will close private detention centers, just like I want to end private prisons. We're going to close private detention centers. So I have a very active agenda, and we're going to be moving on it. And I believe, and obviously it depends upon the outcome of this election, which is why It's so important to register more voters. My campaign's trying to register 3 million more voters, convince people to turn out, because we're going to start early and we're going to be tenacious and absolutely committed to getting a positive result. And I think the chances, once we win, will improve dramatically.
Madam Secretary, you spoke about the deportations. President Obama, some call the deporter-in-chief. You have alluded already to your priority will be criminals, but how do you walk back the deportations? There are people who are not criminals that are deported daily from this country. How do you walk back the deportations, comply with the law, and not inherit the title of deporter? At the same time, all these steps to help mobilize the Latino community to the polls, many who still believe that their vote was taken for granted in 2008, 2012, and then we have the emails from WikiLeaks that say that they are the loyalty brand of the party.
Well, look, I think that the president was committed to immigration reform. It's one of the reasons we got the bipartisan bill passed in the Senate. And what we didn't get, though, was enough political pressure to turn that bill into a voting issue in the 2010 midterm election. And here's one of my frustrations. People turn out to vote for presidential elections and then often don't for midterm elections. So we lost a lot of the leverage because we lost the House of Representatives. So nothing happens easily or quickly in modern politics in America, but here is what I know. As I have said, we are not going to be deporting hard-working people and break up families. I've been on record for a year and a half about this, and that will be how I direct the Department of Homeland Security to act. We are going to push on immigration reform, and I will need not only a considerable vote in November, but I will need people across our country to make it clear to their elected representatives that they are going to be held accountable for how they are going to act on immigration reform. If we put enough organizing and political effort into this, I am optimistic, and I believe we can get this done. But it won't happen simply because we want it, and I can only say that I will give you my very best efforts, and I will do everything I can to help elect a Democratic Senate. And I've already talked to some of my former colleagues in the Senate. This will be fast-tracked. We already know what can pass the Senate because it happened just a few years ago. And if we then put enough pressure on the House and do everything we can to, really force them to have to take what the Senate passes, I think the outcome will be very different this time. And that's my goal, and that's what I'm going to do.